sometimes say to me, I don't understand why they can't solve this case. And I'm like, I do. They haven't got any evidence. They just don't have a clue. You know, I mean, let's say a person just disappears in the night one day, and their body is found 5 years later in a field. Just got nothing to work with. I mean, and some, you know, when you call the detective, well, we're working on it. Not working on it. They're like, I don't know what to do with it. So they're just ignoring it. And they usually lie about that. I wish they'd tell the truth and say, look, we just don't have any idea what to do with this case. There's simply no evidence we could ever take to court. Prosecutor's not going to do it because there's just no evidence. I don't even know where to look. And that's sometimes a fact. There's some very sad situations where there's just nothing to work with. So you have to have evidence. You have to have the proper information. You have to have good evidence to link something to something. The next big problem is the prosecutor. Prosecutor wants to win a case. I mean, they're political animals, and politics is the biggest problem in investigations. If you want to throw a fight out there, we need to fight for accountability. That's my big spiel, is that we need a 5-year, haven't solved the case, open up the records so we can find out whether you did your job, and the prosecutor's sitting on his damn butt when he should be taking this to court. Prosecutor wants to win his case. He wants a 99% win record. And if he thinks it's a little bit shaky, not taking it to court. Just not. And you're going to sit there wondering why this case isn't moving forward. Is because the prosecutor's sitting on it. There's an interesting case where, I want to point out this one too, the money issues. It costs money to take any case to court. The harder the case, the more money is going to be put into it. They have to believe that the citizens care about this case. Mm-hmm. This is a terrible, terrible thing, but the citizens have to care. I worked on a case where this guy from Kansas and his living girlfriend, she was breaking up with him, but she decided to go on that last trip to see if they could put things together. She's always, don't do that, you know. They went camping in another state, and they went canoeing down a river, and then they camped out. Next day, he says, he wakes up and he finds her drowned in the river, naked. And so he cleans up the campsite, puts her in some hefty bags, puts her in the canoe, and he canoes down the river and he's smiling and waving. Hi! He really was. People said he came by and he was just smiling. He canoes down the river, gets to his car, puts her in the trunk, drives down to the town, large police jurisdiction. He drives through the large police jurisdiction till he finds his teeny-weeny police department in some podunk place out there. Then he pulls in and he goes, oh, yeah, my wife drowned, she's in the trunk. And they go in there and they go, yeah, she doesn't have to bags. Now, they believe he killed her. It's interesting because I found out that he was reading, his mother-in-law, gave him a Reader's Digest book because he was interested in it. And it was about how a man drowned his wife in the bathtub by pulling up her feet. Right before this happened. And he was suspect in the BTK homicides too, because when they went and investigated him, they found that he had interesting weaponry and bags of pubic hair under his bed. Oh my God. Cribbity-doo. And yeah. And so here he is in this jurisdiction, and I'm like talking with the sheriff. I'm like, look, this guy killed this woman, and the evidence is pretty strong. It's heavily circumstantial, but it is pretty darn strong. And he just said, the prosecutor won't take the case. And I said, why not? And he said, because the victim's not from here, and the perpetrator's not from here, and as far as the folk here are concerned, there's no threat to the area.
So he took her out of the jurisdiction on purpose? That's why he went?
No, he was from Kansas. He went camping in another state.
Right.
So when it happened there, the people in that town have to spend the money to prosecute this case. You know, nobody's got any money. So they're like, well, we don't care about the woman. She wasn't one of us. We don't care about him because he doesn't live here. So we don't have any threat in our town, and we're not all that concerned about the justice factor because it's not one of us. So the prosecutor wasn't going to spend all that money on a bunch of out-of-towners. And that's the reality of how things work, because there is no accountability process in the United States. That prosecution and that police department can be held accountable. There's none. And you have no rights. No citizen has any rights in the United States.
So, you have a petition or something to change that?
To change it is going to be a huge effort to require, and I don't know if that'd be state by state or it'd be a federal law, that at a certain point in investigation, the records have to be opened up, and there's a special board that's not law enforcement and prosecution, looks over this case to determine whether another investigative group should be applied to this so that somebody else can solve the case, or whether they should be held accountable for not doing the case right or not prosecuting it. We don't have any laws. The cases in this country, what they say is, if it's of interest to the state has a choice to investigate or not investigate. They don't have to even investigate a case. That's their choice. Because a homicide is of interest to the state, not to the family or the citizens, only to the state. Now, of course, the state is the citizens, but hey, people. Yeah.
Do police detectives, do they have to have any type of licensing?
They have to go through the police academy, yes. And now here's another big point I want to make. So one reason is the prosecution has to have a desire to prosecute. They have to have the money to prosecute. They have to have the people, wanting the money to be spent. But when we get back to the case issues, what else goes wrong with these cases? One of the number one things goes wrong with these cases is lack of training.
Yep.
The majority of detectives have really very little training, and we don't know that. Because I don't know how many times I'll comment on a case and somebody will come right into an email. You think you know better than the police department. They're the professionals. I'm like, yeah, I do know better than the police department. But, and it isn't that. It's true for all detectives. There are some detectives out here, or track detectives. They're great. They have to have a number of things, though, to be great. Number one is logic. Most guys going into the police force aren't brought into the police force because they're logical human beings. Mm-hmm. They don't say, can you take this logic class, and show us how smart you are? No, they want to know, can you handle criminals? Can you walk around and manhandle people and, carry a gun? Can you shoot? Because you're going to be a street cop. That's what you go in the police department, you become a street cop. So you go in, and that's what you do. You go through the academy, which teaches you how to do street stuff. They make sure that you know how to, read the Mirror rights, that you know how to put the handcuffs on properly, that you know what to look for, when to call people back up, that kind of thing. Okay, so now you got a street cop, he's out there for 3 years, goes down to the lodge, he hangs out, drinks with his buddies, and people like him. He gets promoted to be a detective. He doesn't have to go to detective school. It'd be nice if they would, but most police departments don't have detective school. They become a detective, and then hopefully somewhere along the way, they get some investigative training seminars. Hopefully. My daughter is a detective. She's been a detective for 3 years now, child abuse detective. 3 years, she's had 1 week of training provided by a volunteer organization for child abuse. They pay for it, kind of like a cucumber thing, but she had to pay her own gas money to drive to Tennessee to take this course because the police department had no money. And that's a problem. Police departments they just don't have enough funding for all this training that we'd like them to have. And so a lot of the detectives aren't getting it. Now, do I think my daughter's a good detective? Of course. She's a great detective. But again, I trained her. She spent years growing up with me going, oh, what happened to her? Oh, I see that. So, she's been around me talking about profiling and homicides and all kinds of things for years before she became a detective. And she's a very logical woman. She is very logical. She's very good at her job. But as she'll say, so when you go and the case hits the department, it's like, let's see, you got a 7. You get her. You got, hey guys, you got Bob. Bob's an idiot. Yeah. And I have walked into cases when I've done profiling and sat there and I go, well, let me tell you what happened. And they tell me this, I'm just going, really? Oh my God. That's what you think, huh? Doesn't even have anything to do with the evidence. Nothing to do with the evidence. Just something they decided happened. So some of them aren't logical at all. Then they get very little training. Next problem is very little time to work the cases. Where I live in Prince George's County, good Lord, I think we had like 18 homicides by like February 1st or something. I mean, they got so many homicides, they don't know what to do with them. 1 year, Washington, D.C. had 365 homicides for 365 days of the year. So, you know, that's,